The galaxy was in chaos. A massive alien swarm, known only as the Zilak, had descended on countless planets, spreading fear and destruction. No one had expected such a powerful and merciless force. As news of the swarm's advance spread, panic gripped every corner of the galaxy. On the outer rim, far from the heart of the galaxy, lay the human colony of New Hope. It was a thriving settlement, bustling with activity and hope for the future. But now it faced a dire threat. The Zilak had reached the edge of their system, and the small colony was their next target. Captain James Carter, a seasoned Marine with years of experience, was on duty when the alarm sounded. He and his team had been preparing for possible threats, but nothing had prepared them for this. The swarm was massive, darkening the sky as it approached. Inside the command center of New Hope, panic was taking hold. Colony leaders scrambled to make decisions. The leader of the colony, Governor Lisa Monroe, looked out over the chaotic scene with worry etched on her face. She turned to her advisors, her voice shaking slightly. "We need to evacuate immediately," she said. "We can't hold them off. It's too dangerous." The order was given, and the colony's evacuation procedures were put into action. Families rushed to escape pods and transport ships, their faces filled with fear and confusion. The streets, once bustling with life, were now filled with a frantic rush as people tried to escape the impending doom. Captain Carter stood firm, watching the chaos unfold. He knew his Marines were their last hope. The evacuation was a necessary measure, but he also knew that abandoning the colony without a fight was not an option. He turned to his squad, a group of battle-hardened Marines who had seen their share of combat. "All right, listen up!" Carter's voice was steady and commanding. "We're not running. We're staying here to buy as much time as we can. The colony might be lost, but we'll make sure it's not taken easily." The Marines nodded, their faces set with determination. They gathered their weapons and equipment, readying themselves for the battle ahead. The colony's defenses were minimal, and the swarm was overwhelming in size and power, but they were not going to give up without a fight. As the swarm approached, its shadow cast over the colony like a dark cloud, the Marines took their positions. They set up makeshift barricades and prepared their heavy weaponry. The swarm's advance was relentless, and the first waves of Zilak fighters began to appear on the outskirts of the colony. Captain Carter and his Marines were ready. The first wave of attackers came in a rush, and the Marines fired back with precision. Explosions lit up the night sky as the Marines' weapons found their targets. Despite the ferocity of the assault, the Marines held their ground, their training and resolve shining through. The Zilak were unlike any enemy the Marines had faced before. Their ships were sleek and fast, and their forces seemed endless. Each wave of attack was more intense than the last, pushing the Marines to their limits. Yet, they fought with everything they had, determined to protect their home and its people. Governor Monroe watched from the command center, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision to evacuate. She knew the Marines were giving everything they had, and their bravery was a beacon of hope in the midst of the chaos. As the battle raged on, she could see the true extent of the Marines' courage and sacrifice. Hours turned into a blur of gunfire and explosions. The Marines fought bravely, but the swarm showed no signs of slowing down. The colony's defenses were slowly being overrun, but the Marines' fierce resistance was buying precious time for the evacuation. In the midst of the chaos, Captain Carter fought alongside his team, their unity and strength a testament to their training and spirit. Despite the odds, they held their positions, refusing to let the Zilak take their home without a fight. As the first light of dawn began to break, the swarm's attack showed no sign of easing. The battle for New Hope was far from over, but the Marines had proven their mettle. They had faced an enemy unlike any other and fought back with everything they had, embodying the true spirit of humanity's courage in the face of overwhelming odds. The fight was only beginning, but Captain Carter and his Marines stood resolute, ready to face whatever the swarm threw at them next. The battle for New Hope continued through the night. As dawn approached, the skies above the colony were still darkened by the swarm of Zilak ships. The once thriving colony was now a war zone, with debris scattered across the streets and smoke rising from the wreckage. Despite the chaos, Captain James Carter and his Marines stood firm. Inside the command center, Governor Lisa Monroe looked at the battle unfolding on the monitors. Her heart ached as she saw the extent of the destruction. She knew the evacuation was crucial, but it was painful to watch her home being torn apart. She turned to her advisors and made a difficult decision. "We need to buy more time for the evacuation," Monroe said with resolve. "Captain Carter and his Marines are holding the line as best as they can. We must support them however we can." Captain Carter, meanwhile, was in the thick of the fight. The Marines had set up defensive positions throughout the colony, making use of every available resource. They had fortified key areas and set up traps to slow down the Zilak advance. Their plan was simple: hold their ground, protect the remaining civilians, and delay the swarm's progress as long as possible. Sergeant Mike Ellis, one of Carter's trusted squad leaders, was stationed at a makeshift barricade near the colony's power station. The Zilak were relentless, and their attacks seemed to come in waves. Ellis and his team were exhausted but determined. Each Marine knew the importance of their mission and was prepared to fight to the last breath. "Hold the line!" Ellis shouted over the roar of gunfire. "We can't let them through!" His squad responded with a fierce defense, firing their weapons with precision and courage. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Marines' discipline and training shone through. They worked as a unit, covering each other and keeping the Zilak at bay. Explosions rocked the area as the Marines' heavy weapons found their targets, creating moments of brief respite amid the chaos. Back at the command center, Monroe watched as the Marines continued their heroic struggle. She knew that their bravery was not only buying time for the evacuation, but also sending a message to the rest of the galaxy. The Marines of New Hope were not giving up, and their stand was a testament to human resilience. As the battle dragged on, Carter and his Marines adapted their tactics. They realized that they needed to use every advantage they had. Captain Carter decided to take a more aggressive approach. He ordered a counteroffensive, using the colony's remaining energy reserves to power up old defense systems and launch a surprise attack on the Zilak. "Marines, listen up!" Carter's voice was firm. "We're going to hit them hard and fast. We've got one shot at this, so make it count." The Marines moved with purpose, executing Carter's plan with precision. They launched a series of coordinated strikes against the Zilak, targeting their command ships and key positions. The sudden assault caught the Zilak off guard, causing confusion and temporary setbacks in their advance. In the midst of the counterattack, Private Sarah Mitchell, a rookie Marine, found herself face-to-face with a Zilak fighter. Her hands trembled as she fired her weapon, but her training kicked in, and she took down the enemy with a well-aimed shot. Her bravery inspired her fellow Marines, who rallied around her and fought with renewed vigor. The battle continued, and the Marines' counteroffensive began to take its toll on the swarm. The Zilak were forced to regroup, giving the remaining civilians more time to escape. The Marines' bravery was making a difference, and the tide of the battle seemed to shift ever so slightly in their favor. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the Marines' efforts began to pay off. The swarm's relentless advance was slowing down, and the defenders were able to hold their ground with greater success. Captain Carter, though weary, remained resolute. His leadership and the Marines' courage had become the colony's beacon of hope. Though the battle was far from over, the Marines of New Hope had shown their mettle. They had stood firm against a formidable enemy, their bravery and determination a shining example of humanity's fighting spirit. Their stand was not just a defense of their home, but a defiant message to the galaxy: humanity would not be easily defeated. The battle for New Hope raged on, and the swarm of Zilak continued its relentless assault. The colony, once a symbol of hope and progress, was now a battlefield. Smoke and debris filled the air, and the sounds of explosions and gunfire echoed through the streets. Despite the Marines' fierce resistance, the swarm seemed unstoppable. Captain James Carter knew that to save the colony, they needed to turn the tide of the battle. The Marines had held their ground admirably, but their defenses were starting to falter under the weight of the swarm's attack. Carter gathered his remaining squad leaders for a crucial meeting in a makeshift command center set up in the colony's underground bunkers. "We can't keep this up forever," Carter said, his voice strained but determined. "We need to change our strategy if we're going to win this fight." Sergeant Mike Ellis, who had been on the front lines for hours, nodded in agreement. "What do you have in mind, sir?" Carter took a deep breath and outlined his plan. "We're going to use the colony's infrastructure to our advantage. There are old defense systems we haven't used in years. If we can power them up and set some traps, we might be able to catch the Zilak off guard." The squad leaders agreed, and the Marines set to work. They moved quickly, repurposing old equipment and setting up new defenses. They used their remaining energy reserves to power up the colony's ancient laser turrets and energy barriers. Their goal was to create a series of traps and fortifications that would slow down and weaken the Zilak. Meanwhile, the Zilak, sensing an opportunity to break through, pressed their attack with increased intensity. Their ships swooped down, launching waves of smaller fighters and drones. The Marines fought back with everything they had, but the swarm's numbers were overwhelming. As the Zilak advanced, the Marines' new defenses were ready. The old laser turrets, once dormant, roared back to life, targeting the incoming swarm with precise fire. Explosions lit up the sky as the lasers struck their targets, creating a shield around key areas of the colony. The energy barriers held strong, blocking many of the Zilak's attacks and buying precious time. The Zilak were caught off guard by the sudden surge in resistance. Their forces, which had been pressing forward with confidence, were now facing unexpected obstacles. The Marines' traps and defenses caused confusion among the swarm, disrupting their advance and forcing them to regroup. Captain Carter, observing the chaos from the command center, felt a surge of hope. The tide of the battle was shifting, and the Marines' plan was working. He ordered a counteroffensive, using the momentary advantage to launch a coordinated attack on the Zilak's command ships. "Marines, we've got them on the ropes!" Carter's voice crackled over the comms. "Let's hit them hard and finish this!" The Marines sprang into action. They moved with renewed energy and purpose, targeting the Zilak's command ships and key infrastructure. Their attacks were swift and effective, causing significant damage to the swarm's operations. The Zilak, struggling to adapt to the unexpected resistance, found themselves in a defensive posture. Private Sarah Mitchell, who had shown bravery in the previous battles, now played a crucial role in the counteroffensive. Her sharp aim and quick thinking helped to take down several key targets, and her actions inspired her fellow Marines. The unity and determination of the team became a powerful force against the Zilak. As the battle progressed, the Zilak's once unstoppable advance began to falter. The Marines' clever use of their defenses and the aggressive counterattack turned the tide of the battle. The swarm was pushed back and the colony's key areas were secured. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the battle had taken a dramatic turn. The Zilak, having suffered heavy losses and faced unexpected resistance, were forced to retreat. The skies cleared as the swarm's ships withdrew, leaving behind a battered but victorious colony. Captain Carter and his Marines stood amidst the wreckage, their faces smeared with grime but filled with relief and triumph. The battle for New Hope was far from over, but the Marines had achieved a crucial victory. They had turned the tide against an overwhelming enemy and proven their resilience and bravery. As the dust settled and the Marines began to assess the damage, they knew that the fight was not yet finished. But for now, they had gained a precious victory and a glimmer of hope for the future. The resilience of humanity had shown its strength, and the Marines of New Hope had become a beacon of courage in the darkest of times. The battle for New Hope had taken a significant turn, but the war was far from over. Captain James Carter and his Marines had managed to push back the Zilak swarm, but the enemy was regrouping and preparing for a final push. The Marines, though exhausted, knew that the decisive moment was approaching. They had to be ready for the final assault. In the command center, the atmosphere was tense. Governor Lisa Monroe, who had been watching the battle from a safe distance, now faced the grim reality of the situation. She turned to Captain Carter, her face lined with concern. "We can't hold out forever," Monroe said. "What's the plan for the final push?" Carter looked at the map of the colony displayed on the holographic screen. "We need to take the fight to them," he said firmly. "We'll launch a full assault on the Zilak's remaining forces. We'll hit them with everything we've got and finish this." The Marines prepared for the final assault with a mix of determination and fatigue. They had fought hard to get to this point, and they knew that this battle could decide the fate of the colony. The defensive positions they had set up were now key to their plan. They would use them as a base for their offensive push. Sergeant Mike Ellis and his squad were stationed at one of the fortified positions. They were tired but resolute. Ellis rallied his team, giving them a final pep talk before the attack. "All right, Marines, this is it," Ellis said. "We've held the line for as long as we can. Now it's time to go on the offensive. Stick together, watch each other's backs, and let's show them what we're made of." The Marines, armed with their heavy weapons and battle gear, took their positions and prepared for the assault. The Zilak, sensing the approaching danger, began to mobilize their forces. The sky above New Hope darkened once more as the swarm's ships assembled for the final confrontation. Captain Carter signaled the start of the attack. The Marines launched a coordinated assault, using their advanced weaponry to strike at the Zilak's command ships and key positions. The initial wave of fire was overwhelming, with explosions lighting up the sky and shaking the ground. The Zilak responded with their own counterattacks, sending waves of smaller fighters and drones to engage the Marines. The air was filled with the sounds of combat, as the Marines fought back with relentless determination. Each squad worked in unison, covering each other and pushing forward. Private Sarah Mitchell, who had proven her bravery in earlier battles, played a key role in the final assault. Her sharp aim and quick reflexes allowed her to take down several Zilak fighters, and her actions inspired her fellow Marines. She fought with a sense of purpose, knowing that the outcome of the battle depended on their success. The battle intensified as the Marines advanced. They used every available resource, including the colony's remaining defenses, to press their attack. The Zilak's command ships were heavily protected, but the Marines' coordinated strikes began to take their toll. The swarm's forces were forced to retreat in several areas, creating gaps in their defenses. Captain Carter led a daring charge towards the Zilak's central command ship. The Marines fought their way through enemy lines, facing fierce resistance but pushing forward with unwavering resolve. Carter and his team fought their way to the heart of the Zilak's command structure, determined to deliver a decisive blow. As the Marines reached the central command ship, they faced the Zilak's elite guards. The fight was fierce, with every inch gained coming at a high cost. Carter and his team fought with everything they had, their weapons and tactics honed through countless battles. The turning point came when Private Mitchell managed to disable the command ship's main power source with a well-placed shot. The ship's defenses faltered, and the Zilak forces began to crumble. The Marines pressed their advantage, pushing the Zilak back and securing the area. The final assault was a grueling and intense battle, but the Marines' determination and bravery led them to victory. As the last of the Zilak forces were pushed out of the colony, the sky began to clear and the sounds of combat faded. New Hope had been saved thanks to the courage and sacrifice of its defenders. Captain Carter and his Marines stood amidst the wreckage, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. The colony was battered and scarred, but it had survived. The Marines had turned the tide and secured a hard-fought victory, proving once again the indomitable spirit of humanity in the face of overwhelming odds. The battle for New Hope had ended, but the aftermath was just beginning. The once vibrant colony lay in ruins, with buildings damaged and streets littered with debris. The air was filled with the smell of smoke and the sounds of cleanup efforts. Captain James Carter and his Marines had achieved a hard-fought victory, but the true challenge now was to rebuild and reflect on what had happened. In the command center, Governor Lisa Monroe surveyed the damage. The screens displayed images of the battered colony, and her heart ached at the sight. She turned to Captain Carter, who was equally weary but determined. "We've won the battle, but we have a lot of work ahead," Monroe said. "What's our next step?" Carter looked around at the Marines who had fought so valiantly. "First, we need to make sure everyone is accounted for and safe," he said. "Then, we'll start the rebuilding process. It won't be easy, but we'll do it together." The Marines began their work immediately. They cleared debris, repaired damaged structures, and assisted in the evacuation of injured civilians. The once chaotic streets were now filled with the sounds of rebuilding, heavy machinery, hammers, and voices of people working together. Despite the exhaustion, there was a sense of purpose and hope in the air. Sergeant Mike Ellis was in charge of organizing the recovery efforts in one of the hardest-hit areas. He and his squad worked tirelessly to clear rubble and ensure that essential services were restored. Ellis was determined to help the colony recover, and his leadership inspired those around him. "We've got a lot to do, but we're making progress," Ellis said as he worked alongside his team. "Let's keep pushing forward. We'll get this place back on its feet." Private Sarah Mitchell, still shaken by the intensity of the recent battles, focused on helping the injured. She assisted medics and provided comfort to those who had lost loved ones or homes. Her compassion and care were a reminder of the humanity that the Marines were fighting to protect. As the days passed, the colony began to show signs of recovery. Temporary shelters were set up and essential supplies were distributed. The community came together, with people from all walks of life contributing to the rebuilding efforts. The spirit of unity and resilience was evident as everyone worked to restore their home. Captain Carter took some time to reflect on the recent events. He walked through the damaged streets, observing the changes and progress. He saw the faces of the people he had fought to protect, their gratitude evident in their eyes. Carter knew that the battle had come at a high cost, but he also saw the strength and determination of the human spirit. In a quiet moment, Carter met with Governor Monroe to discuss the future. They talked about the steps needed to fully rebuild the colony and the support that would be required from the wider galaxy. Monroe expressed her gratitude for the Marines' bravery and the role they played in saving New Hope. "You and your team have done an incredible job," Monroe said. "We couldn't have made it through without you." Carter nodded, acknowledging the compliment. "We did what we had to do," he replied. "But it's the people of New Hope who are truly remarkable. Their strength and courage will see this colony through." As the rebuilding continued, the Marines remained a vital part of the recovery process. They provided security, assisted with reconstruction, and helped to restore a sense of normalcy to the colony. Their presence was a symbol of hope and reassurance to the people of New Hope. The battle for New Hope had shown the galaxy the resilience and bravery of humanity. The Marines had fought valiantly, and their actions had secured a future for the colony. Now, as they worked to rebuild and recover, they reflected on the cost of their victory and the strength of their spirit. New Hope would rise again from the ashes, stronger and more united than ever before. The scars of battle would remain, but so would the lessons learned and the bonds forged in the heat of conflict. The colony's future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity's spirit would not be easily broken, and its resolve would always shine through in the darkest of times.